The week that was on the 27th of January 2018 from a WBRN radio in Boston and on the Bostonred Network. Davos is now over till next year. It was a very interesting year there, and we'll be bringing you a number of events from Davos. We brought the one event it's on many of our networks about jobs and what will be the nature of work in the coming years. A nice panel discussion there. Professor Horschel was there talking about workers and where workers will be in the next 3 to 5 years, perhaps, with autonomous cars being there, various other forms of automation. And she was the person that wrote the book Stranger in Their Own Land, about some workers in Louisiana plotting their future and going with a new dynamic nationalist economy program. We'll touch on DJ Trump's visit to the World Economic Forum, which is obviously based on global economics. And Trump was there with his American First program, a watered-down version of it, however, but nonetheless there, talking about trade practices, etc., and what to do about them. Now, he has imposed tariffs on things like washing machines, which, again, that effect on Samsung, which is a Korean manufacturer, and solar panels, of course, coming from China, which is, there are two elements to the solar panels. It'll resurrect some of the companies that President Barack Obama put into motion. But at the same time, the many companies that are engaged now in installing these panels will themselves find the higher costs to consumers as being a barrier. So in other words, the plans that finance these installations, particularly in the western states of California, Nevada, etc., and other places across the U.S. that have sunlight, say, 9-10 months per year, that will have some effect because these panels are going in and then financing plans, etc. So those are some things that will come about there. And we also have some new big data out. We'll go to that from the Commerce Department and their GDP analysis and where things are going. Now, the analysis that they have for Q4, it would be of 2017. There is a trend of thought that Q4 is sort of like a barometer to Q1 of 2018, or Q1 of any year, and we'll see where that is going. In this particular economy, we have a very interesting situation. We have quantitative easing, and there was a panel discussion at the World Economic Forum on quantitative easing. We'll bring that to you on probably this channel, the Numbers Man channel. And we'll talk about that more in depth. But we have quantitative easing going on here. We also have protectionism coming into it. There are many arguments about protectionism. We won't go into that here. It has its, as anything else, positive, negative aspects depending on where you're going. And you have these various trade deals that have to be re-ratified or have been abandoned. One is NAFTA. There's been a big argument about NAFTA, particularly with the trade union organizations, many not being in favor of NAFTA. Will they come up with another NAFTA or will they not? Well, that'll be an interesting situation. That's covers trade between Mexico and Canada. A big bone of contention there, particularly with the Mexican element of it, farm products, etc., particularly poultry. A lot of that, the poultry is being processed in the U.S. and sent to Mexico. That would have some ramifications there. And also on the general farming economy. We'll see where that part of the scenario goes. And in addition to quantitative easing, coming is stimulus. Now, the $1.7 trillion 10-year stimulus program, a mixture of government stimulus. The last figure I saw from the government was roughly $200 billion of that, which is a small part of it when you're talking about $1.7 trillion there. You don't really have. But, again, that's a 10-year period, and it does take some time for those kinds of projects to get into the economy. And the regional or state type situations. Now, a lot of commentators talked about, well, it'll do something for the industrial sector and materials. No doubt. But, again, it depends on how the program is set in motion. The tax cuts are out there. Now, the thing with tax cuts is a big question about the reconciliation of funds that the Apples of the world and various other corporations have stashed abroad. How much of that will they bring back? A very big question there. Trump at Davos said one figure, and Apple has another figure. So we'll have to wait and see on that one. And at the same time, you have corporations that are giving out $200 bonuses, $1,000 bonuses. We'll see where the stock buyback programs go. But most of this activity, no doubt, will take place in the first 6 to 12 months of the tax cuts. And we'll be able to get some sort of pattern as to where they are going with this, how much job creation will be there. And at the same time, this is why it's such a mixed bag. You're up against your participation model in terms of around 62%. Can you get to more than 62%? Doubtful. You'll actually, after 2018, you will start to drop that percentage down. The same thing with GDP. It's forecast to be less than 2%. The forecasts are very difficult to say because normally you don't have as many factors out there as you do now, and at the same time there's not a budget. On February the 8th they have to come up with a budget, deal with debt ceiling. There are a lot of unknowns here. So when DJ Trump appeared at Davos, a lot of questions were being bandied around, and we just looked at some of this from the Bloomberg people, their columnists, and the take on it. Period. Teresa Raphael said, let me throw this in, he touched down, this is DJ Trump. There were two strands of opinion. One, he is dangerous to the world, as Patrick Pollana, the chief executive of the French global oil company Total SA, put it. Another view is he's a leader of the world's corporate chiefs that can do business with. Trump, the deal maker, Trump, the trade wrecker, and that big question right there. So we'll see where that trend goes. The North American Free Trade, that's NAFTA, the Chinese trade deal, even the World Trade Organization itself could disappear here if he withdrew the USA from the WTO. Many people are in agreement with that. It's a mixed, again, a very mixed situation. We marched against the WTO in Seattle at one time. The WTO, you don't hear as much about it. It is a World Trade Organization. It has gradually become a little bit more democratic. Doesn't mean it's democratic, but it's one of those organizations out there. And there's another opinion from the investor, George Soros. He said, and we'll have to get his speech there. He expects Trump to be to cease to be a factor, perhaps even as early as 2020. if the Democrats can have a landslide in 2018. If one takes that position, Trump cannot work much and not worth making deals with him. Now, there's always been this proverbial cloud in recent years with presidents. The first 2 years, most of the activity is done. As with DJ Trump and his party, they had expected to get at least, we'll say, 70 or 80% of their work done in the first few months of the administration. That has not happened. They still are dealing with Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. All these budgetary things are out there. They've not gotten their stimulus through. Now, if they were able to do that, and this is where the State of the Union coming up, we'll talk about some of that. But once all that happens, on the political consulting side, we talk about that as clearing the plate. So when you clear your basic issues off the plate, you're dealing with smaller issues. Paul Ryan would want to go to social programs, and the redundancy or cutting involved in that, such as Medicaid. They are dealing with that in Kentucky. They've got a waiver there with work requirements, etc. How much that impacts the healthcare industry, and that's what we look at here from a macro standpoint. It will have a big impact as they tinker with Medicaid, a big program, second only to Medicare. They would like to tinker with it also. So some of those things will come out here. And in other income transfer programs, not certain how much they'll get transferred there. The other big item talked about there is the movement of workers. Immigration, they call it here. And that is a business solution. Do not be fooled by that. When you talk to the dreamers, the young people brought here by their parents and have been trained and are educated, whatever adjective you want to use. But these people, it's in the interest of the economy to keep these people within the U.S. Now, if they leave, particularly those that are highly trained at universities, etc., that will leave a void. So that is part of the thing that hangs over this entire administration. Now, the tax cuts part of it. The tax cuts are going down very well with business people. Tax cuts always go down well with business people. You can deduct 100% of it. If we'll be looking at that very closely. If, for instance, you want to buy $1 million product, you used to have to deduct it in phases. No longer the case. You can deduct it immediately if you need that particular product. The official line you hear time and time again at Davos is tax reform is good, as companies will invest more and increase wages. But will this really be the case? Chances are these things can happen anyway as the economy improves. They normally do. And still the tax cuts are presenting European countries with a dilemma. Do they follow the U.S. and cut their own corporate tax rates, risking a race to the bottom, or do they stay put and risk losing some business to the U.S.? I think they can afford basically to lose some business there. The German chancellor will be presenting these. Under Merkel talked about Europe taking responsibility for its own future now that the U.S. is no longer interested. The French president will present him in an edited version. Emmanuel Macron has made a big pitch to invest in France. He is a centralist president with his own party. He did not run out of one of the established parties. But that doesn't seem to be a clear European consensus on what to do forward. Macron doesn't appear interested in a tax competition. He should not be there. Angela Merkel certainly not cutting taxes now. She is has an expansive coalition with the Social Democrats on her hands. Theresa May, judging from her speech there, that is the British Prime Minister, is preoccupied with tech policy. And there appears to be a strong backlash against U.S. Tech companies. We talked a little about that. The financier George Soros talks about that as limiting the expandability, I guess is putting it, of the Googles and Facebooks of the world. And that is one thing to remember. I remember when I used to advise investors particularly about Google, and took a very conservative situation there. It's the classic Marxist perspective in terms of markets. The Googles, Facebooks of the world have to continually find new markets. But from the old economic thing, if you go, back a long time anyway, Smith, etc., these monopolies are out there, and of course, the increased competition. We're having more democratization of knowledge out there, so tech companies can take off in India, they can take off in the Russian Federation, in China, in Kenya, etc. So the market share will become more limited as to where it is. And also in terms of growth, if you look at countries, China is medium growth there, but if you look at the collection of countries from Kenya on the African continent, now a lot of people are confused. Africa is not a country; it's a whole continent of like 1.2 billion people, and that future will be there. Secondly, behind India, which is way over 1 billion people, has a younger population there, and that's what you look for expansion. Now that is a big problem. The old colonial type countries such as the U.S. and Europe have to compete with this. Germany, that's why you have a big mix there on immigration. There's a population is getting older, period. And then you have the mixture there, as Arlie Herschel talks about, Professor Herschel, out of Berkeley. This whole idea of automation and robotics playing in here. A very good discussion. We invite you to look at it on many of these channels. The work, jobs and work is exactly how they exist. I think on one channel it's called the salt mine there, but the theme is the jobs out of work. There's the old, particularly in Europe and in the U.S., the old Protestant ethic of work. Well, where is that going? Does everyone have a job? Will there be jobs available for everyone that, quote-unquote, wants a job? And that in itself is a big problem. One of the disappointing situations there, that was when Professor Herschel was talking about in another panelist income redistribution, or what is known, used to be known in this country as a guaranteed income. Now it's known as income sufficiency, etc. Professor out of France talked about it in his book on the economy, and that is one of the ways to keep it going. In other words, to have a minimum standard for your citizens, and the government would provide that minimum standards. What it is a transfer payment. In the U.S., we have something called earned income, which is a transfer also. When we worked with the campaign of Dr. George McGovern in the early 70s, there was a lot of talk about this, and Richard Nixon, who won the election, ultimately went along with it. His advisor, they were going along with guaranteed income. It wasn't as much as Dr. McGovern, but it was, I don't know, $400 less or something like that. And in the Watergate situation, it died. The interest died. The other side of capitalism took over, and thus they stayed with, quote unquote, what was called the welfare system, which was heavily administrative type of a system, whereas this system of of transfers would have been a guaranteed situation. In other words, we would not had a means test as such. It would have taken a whole bureaucracy out of the states and out of the federal government. You'd have not had such things as food sufficiency there. It would have all been in your payment system. So thus you've not had all the bureaucracy, but some of the remnants are still around today. It's sort of like if you move to single payer, you eliminate the need for Medicaid primarily, because you'd have single payer, and single payer itself, national insurance program. You could have obviously still a private care, as some people do in Canada, supplemental, but at the same time it would be just a FICA deduction, as many other things are, Medicare, etc., from your taxes, for those that have taxes. Those that don't have taxes, well, that would be taken care of as it is today. But it would be totally a different kind of program. So these were some of the things brought up there at Davos. Trump was there with a 225-year-old band of characters that looked like they literally came out of toy soldiers. And he was standing there. That was 3.5 minutes of the entire presentation. Very, very unusual. Let's move back to, let me see, Bloomberg here. This is on the Boeing airliner situation. They actually, the Bombardier actually won a case to supply their C-Series jets to the Delta airline. The company and its workers aren't being, U.S. company aren't being harmed by the 150 seat aircraft from Canada. That's from the International Trade Commission, said on Friday. Voted a blow to the Boeing company of Chicago. The Bombardiers were sold C-Series at less than, that was their complaint, fair value, but anyway, it disappeared. And from one character here named Chris Murray, he's at Alta Capital Corp in Toronto. I'm just shocked. So anyway, the Bombardier won new American customers while potentially easing tension with Canada and the UK, where the company builds the wings for its aircraft. So that's part of it. We'll go on. Bombardier surged 16%. That's on Toronto market to close, $3.54. Boeing changed very little. It's at $343.22. And at the White House, now this is part of the budget, also wants to increase defense spending by 7%. One of the little caveats here, and let's see what else. This is from Bloomberg, incidentally. And this is the article contrasts with Trump's America First program. From Theresa May, she welcomed the ruling as good news for the British industry. They have a wing factory located in the north of Ireland, Northern Ireland, not actually in Ireland. Boeing's, which brought the complaint, said the government's subsidies helped Bombardier compete at absurdly low prices. Well, there are all kinds of government subsidies here. The same could be argued of Boeing's and their military part there. Some of Delta's peers could be tempted to look at the Series C. Some of those named there would be JetBlue, Spirit, and Sun Country. While not Bombardier, customers all wrote to the Commerce Department, etc., and they would like to look at the deal. So Lufthansa, Deutsche Lufthansa, that's the Swiss airline, the series customers. So in other words, the situation is here. We are having more of that. The State of the Union, I think we pretty much covered that, raises more. This is some Reuters, more eyebrows in a stock. Well, they'll be looking at what DJ Trump says. The S&P had 4 daily declines so far this year. The chance of a end of the month sell-off, a high, if the market doesn't take a breath before then. This is from a fellow named O'Rourke out of Greenwich, Connecticut. Jones trading there. He's a strategist. Nothing's going to trump tax reform since I expect the president to do his little victory lap. Well, victory laps are out there, but victory laps are not very long-lasting. The Dow jumped 1.4% today after Trump's speech. That was last February. But with new laws under his belt, Trump is expected to use his late night State of the Union that's on Tuesday to applaud that victory, and including trade agreements. There may not be enough to inspire investors' enthusiasm. Well, investors are a bit fickle anyway, so it's very difficult to say where they will go. Strategists also weary about Trump will approach international trade. We already talked about that, so we won't go over that. But basically, he could, this is Trump, boost the sentiment with details on his plan. This is the infrastructure plan. We already talked about that. 1.7 trillion over 10 years. The market moved more than 1% in either direction just 15 times the day after an annual State of the Union since 1965, when it was first televised by night. By comparison, it has a 1% or more moved 13 times in sessions before the speech. Well, modern day is a little bit different. We don't really know. We'll go to the BBC. Well, no, we'll go to the GDP. Sort of moving along here at a snail's pace. Nonetheless, this was embargoed on Friday the 26th. National income and product accounts, gross domestic product, Q4, and the annual 2017 advanced estimate. The real GDP increased at an annual rate of 2.6 in Q4, according to the advanced estimate released by the Bureau of Economic Analysis. In the third quarter, real GDP increased 3.2%. The Bureau emphasizes that the fourth quarter advanced estimate released today is based upon source data that are incomplete and subject to further revision. So the second estimate for the fourth quarter, based on more complete, will come out on the 28th of February. So stay tuned on that one. The increase in real GDP in the fourth quarter reflects the positive contributions from personal consumption expenditure, PCE, non-residential fixed investments, exports, residential fixed investments, state and local government spending, federal government spending that are partially offset by a negative contribution from private inventory investment, imports of which were subtracted in the calculation of GDP. The deceleration in real GDP growth in the fourth quarter reflects a downturn in private inventory investment that are partially offset by acceleration in PCE exports and a non-residential fixed investment, state and local government spending, federal government spending, and an upturn in residential fixed investments. Imports, which are subtracted, is calculated on GDP turn up. The current dollar GDP increased by 5%, or $238.3 billion in Q4, to a level of $19,738.9 billion in the third quarter. Current GDP increased 5.3%, or $250.6 billion. The price for fixed gross domestic purchases increased to 2.5% in Q4 compared with an increase of 1.7% in the third quarter. The PCE price index rose 2.8% compared with 1.5% excluding food and energy prices. PCE index increased 1.9% compared with 1.3% in would have been Q3. Oops, just a second here. Get my pointer going here. Personal income, the current dollar personal income increased by 178.9 billion in Q4, compared with an increase of 112.3 billion in Q3. The acceleration in personal income primarily reflected an upturn in personal interest income and an acceleration in non-farm property income. Disposable income is something we look at very, very closely here. Increased 139 billion, or 3.9% in Q4, compared with an increase of 73.8 billion, or 2.1% in Q3. Real disposable income increased 1.1% compared with 0.5% in Q3. Let me current dollar personal income increased in Q4 at 178.9 compared with sorry about that. Got to get my pointer going here. (2017) GDP, real GDP in 2017 was at 2.3%, not the 3.5% as promised, compared with 1.5% in 2016, better there. The increase in real GDP in 2017 reflected positive contributions from PCE, non-residential fixed investment, exports, imports that were subtracted in the calculation of GDP. The acceleration in real GDP from 2016 to 2017 reflected upturn in non-residential fixed investment in exports and a small decrease in private inventory investment. These movements were partially offset by deceleration in residential fixed investment in state, local government spending. Imports were subtracted. Current dollar GDP increased 4.1%, or 762.3 billion in 2017, to a level of 19,386.8 billion, compared with an increase of 2.8%, or 503.8 billion in 2016. The price index for gross domestic purchases increased by 1.8% in 2017, compared with an increase of 1% in 2016. The PCE price index increased 1.7% compared with an increase of 1.2%. That would have been 16. Excluding food and energy, the PCE increased 1.5% compared actually with 1.8%. It was a bit better there. Let me just accelerate my pointer. During 2017, real GDP increased 2.5% compared with 1.8% for 16. The price index for gross domestic purchases increased 1.9% during 2017 compared with an increase of 1.4% during 2017. And source data for the advanced estimate, information on assumption on available stock here. So, in other words, we had the advanced. We'll get the second one in February, the 28th of February, and the third one on March 28th is when we'll get those numbers out. So we'll look forward to those particular numbers. Now we'll go back to the BBC. Okay. Well, we had a big problem with digital currency. Corn check. We talked about corn check before. A little bit perhaps here on Numbers Man, but on our technical presentation, the open source report from WBRN and the Bostonred Network, we talked about corn check, froze deposits, and withdrawals from all of its cryptocurrencies except Bitcoin, as it assesses its loss in NEM, a lesser known currency. Now, this is Japan's, one of its big exchanges asset. It lost some of 530 million or 380 million pounds worth of virtual assets in a hack attack on its network. The stolen coin check assets were said to be kept in hot water, a part of the exchange connected to the internet. That contrasts with cold water, where funds are stored securely offline. Some interesting things here. CoinCheck said that it has a digital address where the assets were sent. Well, yeah. I doubt the thieves are home anymore. Nonetheless, the hackers broke in on Friday at 2:57 GTM. Thursday, the company said in a statement, but the breach was not discovered until 11:25, 8 hours later. The company's chief operating officer, had been sent from CoinCheck, the NEM. Okay, anyway. How damaging is the loss? NEM is the sixth largest cryptocurrency by market value. Fell 11% over the 24 hours to 87 cents that's from the Bloomberg news agency there. Another cryptocurrency, Bitcoin dropped 3.4%. Ripple retreated 9.9% on Friday. More was lost on Friday in 2014 when another one dropped. But again, there's getting to be some normality even in this. What is CoinCheck? They've been around since 2012. That's a long time. The company is based in Tokyo, where it employs 71 people. These mining companies don't employ that many people. One of their customers, Santo, from Tokyo, told Quadado that he deposited 500,000 yen, that is about $600 into his account with the exchange. I never thought this kind of thing would happen. I don't know how much he lost, it doesn't say. But anyway, this is the ups and downs of Bitcoin. Headlines: BBC: U.S. economy loses steam as imports surge. Imports surge were blamed on a downturn, which meant growth for 2017 came in at 2.3%, better than the 2.1% in 16. Well, a little bit better, not that much better. Imports surged by 13.9% in the quarter, fastest pace since the third quarter of 2010, when the Depression was still around. The results sliced 1.1% from GDP in the 3 months. Despite the slowdown, economists expected the U.S. economy to expand by 3% this year, spurred by a weak dollar, rising petrol prices, and the global economy. More than likely not going to happen. Rather than using the annotated figures that the U.S. Bureau of Economic Affairs also published. We consider the simple quarterly growth figures a slowdown of just 0.2 tenths% and missed anyway. One of the reasons for the slightly lower figures is firms reduce their inventory, selling off goods, etc. And that is about it. They really didn't have much more to say. The UK economy, incidentally, is moving up there. What are they doing? Expanded by 0.5%. The economists had expected 0.4%. So they've got something there, I suppose, if you want to go there with them. We'll try to get that up from the National Statistics Bureau. We'll get the broader picture and we'll append it to our report. And we have a little scale on UK growth. The analysis here is choose your carpenter. Like the Bank of England Governor Mark Carney points out, the economy is about 1% smaller than the bank predicted it would be before. That was before the Brexit vote, but now in the event of a stay vote, the pro-Brexit critics point out the economy is doing a lot better than its own warnings there. Annual growth of 1.8% may be less than we would like, but this is far that the Brexit has taken complete pace. Let's go to do the numbers. We can't do anything else, I suppose. But anyway, we will go in that direction here, and we'll look at commodities, look at markets here from the BBC. And we'll see exactly where we're going here with this. And we'll get to the markets, then we'll look at the commodities, particularly Brent crude and Texas Intermediate retirement, incidentally, of T. Boone Pickens. An interesting situation. So, of course, T. Boone was getting up in age, so I said he just threw in the towel, so to speak. Not unusual there. Anyway, nonetheless, the BBC Global 30 on Friday was at $1,298.64. In London, the FTSE All Share was at 24.38. Let me go down the rest of this. In Amsterdam, they were at 1.72 on Friday. The DAC was 41.81 also on Friday. In Paris, they were 47.94. In Brussels, 17.78. In Madrid, 0.10. In Zurich, 32.60. In Moscow, they were in the negative, 24.77 on Friday. In Johannesburg, also in the negative, 294.82. In Bombay, they were in the negative, also 111.20. In Karachi, the same. That was on Thursday, incidentally, in Bombay. In Karachi, 265.58. In Lahore, negative, and these are all negative, incidentally, negative 45.11. In Colombo, 7.83. And Wednesday in Tehran, 297.41. They were in the positive there. And as we look at Asia, in Sydney, 14. In the Nikkei was a negative 37.61. The Hang Seng on Friday, that was Thursday, incidentally, in Sydney. The Hang Seng on Friday at 499.67. In Shanghai on Friday, also 9.82. In New York, 223.92 on Friday. And the Nasdaq at 94.61. The Mercantile, that is the commodities exchange out in the Midwest city of Chicago, at 33.62. In Sao Paulo on Monday, 1,046.71. And in Mexico on Friday, 648.42. Now to the commodities. And where we are here. Brent crude at $70.47 was up 4 cents. On the spot, it was at $58.59, up $57. West Texas crude, it's up as high as I've seen in a long time at $66.18. T-Boone picking, no doubt, has shares left. He's jumping for joy. It was up $6. It was up 67 cents. The Forex was down at $5.90. It went down at $1,354. And Dubai Gold Futures were up $5.60 at $1,349.70. Silver was down 12 cents at $17.40. On to Unex Life Futures. What will we pick on here? Cocoa was up $27. Robusta coffee was up $29. We better watch out there. I was at the market the other day. It was actually down, at least at retail level. The Bloomberg Commodity Index on Wednesday, 85.59. That is where we are. Very concerned, though, about the petrol prices. You know, at one time we were over $100. We're up now to $70.49. And West Texas crude, $66.18. These prices are particularly good for Venezuela, the Russian Federation, and all of the oil producers. That they still have a very controlled environment from OPEC. The slate types there in the U.S. are working at full capacity. We haven't looked hard at any job numbers. We have been looking at rig numbers. They're coming up, and rigs in general. But how is the energy industry doing in terms of workers? Our assumption is that at the current price levels, you're not seeing a surge in hiring because the workers themselves are already basically in place in the Dakotas, etc. The pipelines are working, and thus the locomotives, trains, or what have you, used to run from Warren Buffett's empire at the Burlington Northern are not doing as much business because of that is moving through pipelines. So in other words, things have been changed, and that is some of the economy there, the rail transportation sector there contributing to it, but also with the pipelines with speed. So that part is open. What we will look to is, as the spring driving season comes in and summer driving season, the reflections at the pump. And that will reflect on many people and their disposable income. If you see prices of $3.54 a gallon across the U.S., you will then see that people will have less disposable income, and also at that particular time, after April 15th into May, tax refunds will have filtered back, for the most part, into the economy. So people have put that money out there immediately, and also whatever tax cuts that people realize from the tax cut bill, these are ordinary people, consumers, that they'll have, at least they are trying to do it now, get out the new tables by the middle of February. And there'll be a little more guidance on that. So in other words, there are some things at this point that are up in the air, and we'll be looking in those situations. But no doubt these petrol prices are one of the things to look at as far as the U.S. economy and the British economy in terms of people and their quote-unquote disposable income, which is a very large part of it. On this channel, the Numbers Man channel, we'll have more from Davos, and also on BR on the World, we'll have more reporting of there. For those in business, make next week a productive one. Of course, you'll be waiting. The corporate side will be waiting for the State of the Union. State of the Unions themselves, if 20% of the State of the Union is accomplished, it will be out there. But this will be more of a sales marketing talk. talking about the past more so than the future, because most of the quote-unquote future has been out there, including the infrastructure plan. There's another scheme there that dealing with offshore drilling, the national parks, etc. New regulations for that. I suppose that will be put out there, and new controversies. So that will continue to be. So stay tuned. Next week we'll touch on the State of the Union. We'll be following these petrol prices very, very closely. So we've completed the Q4 of the biggest shopping day. Some of the retailers in pretty good shape. Also, we didn't mention the Dell computer operation is a privately held operation, is thinking of going with an IPO or finding something else, because some of their business model is not doing as well as other parts of it. Their acquisition of the storage company out there, EMC out of Boston, and also where VMware plays in their VMware virtualization and cloud computing. They came with it, and they're thinking of what they're going to do with it and compel it. There's several layers there that they have to sort out. This is one of the problems when you reach that sort of situation. And looking generally in the cloud, as more maturity comes to the cloud, and there are a number of virtualized solutions out there today, and you look at where Amazon is in the scheme of things, and Azure, that's from Microsoft, and several of it. IBM is getting a little bit more into it now, finally into the cloud part, and all these services be made available. So you're going to see a lot more competition coming there. For obviously the consumer, the eye on the prize, and it'll be for many consumers the eye on the gas or petrol at the service facility, except in New Jersey. I think maybe one more state that you can't, Oregon, you can't pump it yourself. You have to have it pumped. So you have slightly higher prices there, but more convenience. Good day.